This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick.
The instability of the House of Representatives was on full display this week with the first ever ouster of a speaker, which led to the first ever use of the continuity of government rules put in after 9/11 to install a speaker pro tempore, Representative Patrick McHenry. What can he do? No one's really sure, but right now he's focused on getting the chamber to elect a new speaker next week. And if you remember how that turned out in January, who knows how long that'll take. I'm political theater podcaster pro tempore Herb Jackson, and I'll be talking about all of this with Roll Call Editor-at-Large John Bennett on today's podcast. Host Jason Dick has been vacated from the chair, but we expect he's a shoo-in to be reelected to another term soon. Okay, John, you and I talked to each other this week, probably more than we have in the previous 9 months combined. As you like to write in the CQ afternoon briefing, let's do this for the next few minutes. You were up there. What did it look like to you at the start of the week?
At the start of the week, it looked like there was an outside chance, at least, that House Democrats would decide the devil they know, Kevin McCarthy, the former speaker now, Kevin McCarthy, would be better than the devil they don't know, and that devil is still TBD. We will find out maybe next week who the duly elected permanent speaker is. I'm not sure that you can say anyone's going to finish out this Congress in the speakership right now. We could be doing this again in a few months. We could be doing this again in nearly 9 months as the crow flies. So what we thought was, enough Democrats there were floor tactics at their disposal. They could have voted present on what's called a motion to vacate. That means kill. The motion to table the motion to vacate. We're professionals, folks. We promise. But they didn't vote present on the motion to table, which would have lowered the vote threshold that needed to pass. That would have set aside Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz's vacate the chair motion. It did not. It passed, and so did the vacate motion. So Democrats voted with 8 Republicans on the motion to vacate. They stayed together as a block, just like they have pretty much this entire Congress, to the surprise of some. And there is no duly elected speaker. But at the beginning of the week, it looked like Democrats were going to sit tight. Or most of them sit tight, but just enough of them saved McCarthy. They got together in a room earlier this week and talked about what to do. And they decided as a group that they were not going to save McCarthy. I talked to a number of them coming out of that meeting, as did our colleagues. And, they said they thought Kevin McCarthy was the worst speaker maybe in U.S. history. They felt he had abused his power with, investigations of President Biden and his son Hunter Biden and other moves. Of course, the formal impeachment inquiry into the Bidens. And then, one thing that both parties agreed on and ultimately sunk Kevin McCarthy was just this notion that you couldn't trust the guy. And, there was a deal in January with the conservative bloc. They felt McCarthy went back on that a number of times, including when he cut a deal with Joe Biden over the debt ceiling and put in some spending caps in June. And just about everybody then believed that McCarthy broke his agreement with Biden in one way or another. It depends on who you ask exactly how they thought that. But that's basically it. And conservatives got a lot out of McCarthy. I mean, I've written that he just placated them over and over, and it was never going to be enough. And really, the starting the formal impeachment inquiry into President Biden, a number of Democrats cited that earlier this week. That was I said on another podcast that I did that may ultimately come back to be one of the clumsier moves that we've seen from a speaker, and I think that did prove itself.
Yeah, we had to quote from one of the Congress people that he got nothing for taking that stance on impeachment. He didn't get any support, and in fact, what the immediate trigger of this obviously was last weekend when there was, after last Friday, a week ago, that the attempt to put up a continuing resolution to keep the government from shutting down at the end of September 30th failed, was defeated, mostly by Democrats and also by a few Republicans. We thought we were going into a shutdown last weekend, and instead McCarthy comes out and says, here's this continuing resolution. It's got everything everybody's been looking for except money for Ukraine, and it goes through the week before Thanksgiving. And he says, let's pass it right away. And Democrats were furious because they hadn't gotten a chance to read it. And then McCarthy goes on Sunday TV and says the Democrats were trying to shut the government down. And we were told that they played video of him saying that in their conference on Tuesday when he was counting on them to maybe save him from the guillotine that was coming at him. So it does seem like he had a whole lot going against him.
Sure.
But they did seem confident at the start of the week that it was all going to blow over. Do you think that was just bluster, or did they actually have a deal that blew up on them?
I do think that they calculated, and I had these thoughts and said them out loud to some folks as we were waiting in hallways. The conservative bloc caved ultimately in January. That's when McCarthy got the gavel. They caved in June when he cut the debt deal with Biden. And there was another cave recently. So that's at least three. I guess the calculation there was, we'll get this thing on the floor. They'll get to vote on the motion to table, and just enough of them will give in. Or Democrats lower the threshold, enough of like the moderate Democrats. And there are still some competitive districts out there, believe it or not. And there are some Democrats who represent those. It was another bad calculation. And, McCarthy never really had a finger on the pulse of the conference.
Yeah, I mean, we did see 11 Republican no's on the motion to table, which is what killed it. And that dropped to 8. In addition to Matt Gaetz, were Andy Biggs, Ken Buck, Burchett, Crane, Good, Rosendahl, and the one that surprised me, Nancy Mace. So what was going on there? She's a member from South Carolina who was in a tough race last year and ended up winning the seat. I think when McCarthy gave his speech about how some of them got elected because he helped them get elected, I think he was talking about her. But what turned her off of McCarthy?
She claims that she had a number of bills that would have been, helped the lives of women, and she had talked to then Speaker McCarthy about those bills, and he had agreed, kind of a handshake agreement, to move those bills to the floor and that she would get votes on them. That never happened, and she's been angry about that for a while. I talked to her a couple months ago in a hallway, and she mentioned that she mentioned that the debt deal spending caps were too high back in June when I talked to her, but it was really the bills, the pro women policy bills. And now, in a remarkable press conference Wednesday evening, after he was no longer speaker, McCarthy pulled back the curtain and said he talked to Mace's chief of staff, who admitted to him that he had kept his promise, and that the bills had gotten some attention and some legislative work was done on them, maybe not on the floor. That's kind of a he said, she said, and how you feel about Kevin McCarthy is probably that's who you're going to believe on that one. But we didn't see that a lot in his speakership. We didn't see him going back and forth with individual members that much. And I suspect the next speaker is going to have to do some of that. publicly and try to put pressure on folks. McCarthy tried to play really an inside game that just didn't work out, and we'll see if the next speaker brings a different style to the job. I think he or she will have to. As I heard a McCarthy ally in between one of the votes admit that Kevin has a very unique leadership style, and when asked if that was sustainable, we just kind of got a kind of a grimace and a sideways head. Yeah.
So, I mean, just for the numbers, Kevin McCarthy's reign as Speaker was the third shortest in history, at 269 or 270 days, depending on whether you count when he won it. Because he won it just after midnight in January. He beat Michael Kerr of Indiana, who was Speaker for 258 days, and the all-time winner is Theodore Pomeroy of New York, who became Speaker on March 3rd, 1869, and served for 1 day. That was at the end of a Congress, because they used to be sworn in later in the year. But now, I mean, McCarthy going in, he also, just a few more numbers. I have on my desk a newspaper we did in November of 2021, a year before the midterm elections, and it has one of our R.J. Mattson cartoons on it, and there's elephant football players spiking the ball at the 50-yard line while the donkey players with Coach Biden can't get out of the huddle. And everybody was thinking this was going to be a red wave, and instead they came in with the same narrow majority that Speaker Pelosi had before him, that basically they couldn't afford to lose more than 5 votes if all the Democrats were voting against them. And so they had to deal with that from the beginning. That's one of the reasons that McCarthy took 15 ballots to become Speaker. But, whoever succeeds him will still be dealing with that majority and potentially bad feelings about what just went down this week. I mean, you have people talking. I mean, do you really think there's any chance any of these people who are saying we got to expel people from the conference are really going to be expelled?
I don't think so. I mean, the only, depending on what this House ethics investigation into the situation with Mr. Gates and the sex trafficking allegations that the Justice Department looked into and chose to not charge him with any criminal wrongdoing. That's really the only threat that anybody would be expelled from the House. And boy,
expelled from the conference.
Oh, from the conference. They need every vote they can get, and you'd rather have those people inside the tent than outside. If I'm sure our readers, our listeners are familiar with that old phrase. You want to keep those guys inside the tent.
Yeah, and so one of the other amazing things about this was how no one seemed to know what came next if it happened, which it did. So part of it is that McCarthy had to leave a list with the House clerk with names who could fill in as Speaker pro tem if he couldn't finish his term, if the seat became vacant. This was anticipated that what if it was a terrorist attack, right? Yeah. So McHenry is suddenly standing there, and he says, we're going to recess to figure out what to do, and practically breaks the podium with the gavel blow. But what can McHenry do?
Not very much. He can turn the lights on and off. We think he can begin and end legislative days. He can't pass legislation. He can't bring anything to the floor. He can oversee a speaker's race, which is what he's going to do. At least the plan for now is starting Wednesday.
Well, there are some people who are saying they think he can do that, and it's going to be. It doesn't look like he's going to try and find out. But yeah, it is just so. But right now he's focused on let's elect a speaker next week, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
There's
a private conference for Republicans coming next at the beginning of the week, and then they're supposed to vote on Wednesday. So where do we see that shaping up right now?
What Republicans want to do, at least McHenry and others, is meet in their conference in private starting on Tuesday, hopefully they want to finish on Tuesday and settle on one conference nominee for speaker. Now, Kevin McCarthy in January won that election behind closed doors, and then all kinds of maneuvering and hijinks went on when they got to the floor. So that's the trick here is to get a name out of conference that at least the majority of the conference supports, to get it on the floor to start that process. And we saw last time that was what however many days and 15 ballots later, McCarthy in the wee hours of the morning became the 55th speaker. So you want to start that process. If it takes 3 or 4 days, it takes 3 or 4 days. But, members like to go home on the weekends. So you start it on Wednesday and maybe Friday night. There's white smoke coming out of the Capitol Dome.
And right now we have the current majority leader, Steve Scalise, Louisiana, and the Judiciary Chairman, Jim Jordan of Ohio running. Anybody else going to get in? Can either of them get to, 216, 217 that they need?
It's not 218. It's below that. I think it might be 216 or 217. You're right.
Because we still have empty seats in Rhode Island. And, if this goes until the week after the election, the Democrats will pick up one seat from Rhode Island. But,
Right. Hopefully it won't, for our sake, at least. And the country's sake, because we've got a government funding deadline in about 40 days. So they've got to resolve this and get back to work. Right now, it's a two-man race. Others could get in. It looks like McHenry is not going to get in, at least right now. Now, can either Mr. Jordan or Mr. Scalise get to 216 or 217? Not with the other one in the race, I think. That's going to splinter the vote. Jordan's going to get the more far right. He'll probably get some of those 8. He might not get all of those 8, but he'll get a lot of those 8 that voted to oust McCarthy. And Scalise is going to be more the candidate of your House moderates, including the Biden 18. Of course, those are Republicans that won districts in 2022 that President Biden won in 2020. So you got to, I would guess those guys, most of them at least, are going to go with Scalise. So you can see in this world where Scalise gets this half of the conference and Jordan gets this half, and you might have some folks here and then over here, and who can pick up those undecideds might have a leg up, at least in conference. On the floor, this could just become a lengthy battle of who's tired of being in the room, who's tired of running to the bathroom and coming back to vote, and who wants to get home and see the family or raise money or what the various things lawmakers do when they go back to their districts. So, I don't think anyone so far expects this to be resolved necessarily on Wednesday. Now, for the health and well-being, and there's a lot of ill will in that room in the Republican conference. Steve Womack, a congressman from Arkansas, told reporters after the vote on Wednesday that he was worried about fisticuffs breaking out. So McHenry, he sent them home in part to cool down, not just to get the speaker's race going with I declare and he's declaring and he might get in and he wants to be majority leader and they want to be whip. But also just to, it's like when your parents told you and your brother to go to separate rooms. McHenry did some of that this week. But, for the sake of the conference and for the sake of getting back to work, because, even Matt Gaetz says he wants to move the remaining 8 House Republican spending bills. For the sake of all that, if they could work this out Tuesday night amongst themselves, get unanimity on who can get to 216 or 217 and wrap this up Wednesday, that would be better for everyone. But that's not how this Congress has operated so far. There's no evidence that this is going to be anything but noisy and long.
And just to be clear, it's not just winning a majority of the Republican votes. You actually have to win a majority of all the votes in the House. And when we were going through multiple ballots in January, the first 14 ballots, the top vote getter was Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, because the Democrats never broke. He just never could get a single Republican vote.
Yeah.
And McCarthy was always the lead vote getter among the Republicans.
Yeah.
He just never could get enough of his caucus, which they had a majority on, to get him over the top. So those same rules will apply. And, we could have, again, we talked about voting present. If two Democrats vote present, that's effectively one vote for McCarthy, or one vote for whoever is the leader, that they don't have to overcome a vote that would be going up for Jeffries. And you have to do it on paper, but it makes sense.
It does. I've done that. Yeah.
But going forward, like where do you see fallout from this continuing to litter the calendar for the fall?
I mean, look no further than what I referred to earlier, which is the continuing resolution, which is going to expire, and that means government funding will run out again in mid-November, and McCarthy is out largely because he just could not satisfy the Gates 8 on spending, even though he gave in and gave ground and gave them what they wanted over here, and did it again on Tuesday, and same thing on the Thursday. So the next speaker is going to have to solve something of a not even a riddle. It's I don't even know. It's just solving this problem of what's enough. What do they want? And I don't think anybody really knows fully what the Gates 8 wants. Maybe Jim Jordan, who's more in line with them. He used to be he was a founding member of the Freedom Caucus. So maybe he has a better idea of, policy wise and spending wise, what these 8 any day it's 8 to 15 and the names can change who's in the 8 and who's the other 7. So
you've not mentioned the name of the former president yet. Do we put any stock at all in the Donald Trump could come in and take this?
Speaker is different. You have to be present. You need to be talking to your members. For those of us who have spent time outside of Speaker Pelosi's office or Speaker Boehner's office or McCarthy's office in the Capitol, it's a steady flow of people in and out. There's meetings all day when they're in, even when they're not. They're just meeting with folks and, how far can you go on this bill, or what can I trade on that bill, and what do you need? And, in a way that suits Trump's personality, because he loves attention. He loves to feel like people are asking him for things, but he was not very good as president at making deals with Congress. Usually it was Mark Short, who was briefly his legislative liaison, or his vice president, Mike Pence. Of course, they've broken up now. But it was folks like that who they were leading the negotiations. They were making the deals with Congress. Pence is the one who negotiated the end of the shutdown that bridged 2018 and 2019. And by the way, Trump got nothing really in return for agreeing to sign the bill that ended that shutdown. So, as much as the former president might be saying this, putting it out on his social media platform, he's got 2 rallies this weekend, I believe Iowa and New Hampshire. I'm sure he's going to tell us that he'd be the greatest speaker in U.S. history. But his personality, in a lot of ways might be suited for part of the job. But, he's not going to want to do some of the ceremonial things, like they're unveiling a portrait and he has to be in the CVC rotunda or foyer for a 90-minute ceremony where he might give 3 minutes of remarks. I mean, he might turn it into a campaign rally like everything else, but there's a lot of the job that he's not going to like. And Kevin McCarthy was not home very much. Kevin McCarthy was out raising money and helping his candidates. That's really how he got the speakership, because he had raised so much money and handed it out. Trump's not going to want to do that. He's going to want to play golf on Saturday.
But the amazing thing about this is when we talk about it, the job is what the speaker makes the job,
True.
Which creates the possibility that you get a Trump or somebody else as speaker to satisfy certain people, but the majority leader is the one who actually runs
Yeah.
the conference and makes the decisions. And that's the other wild card here is,
Yeah.
could they come out of that Tuesday meeting with that kind of power sharing agreement? We will certainly watch. No one really will broach that subject right now because you want your guy to win, right?
Yeah.
But if it becomes clear that nobody's going to win, then somebody's going to have to get them together. The other thing when we talk about the fallout is that, our gun pod team, as we like to call them, the defense reporters, clearly pointed out that what's going to really be even more difficult now is passing funding for Ukraine. President Biden has been pushing very hard for that, and it's one of those things where if it went up for a clean vote, it would probably get bipartisan majorities, but maybe not 218 in the House, from the Republicans. So it's going to be really difficult for them to slide that in now. But we didn't do, we did some disaster aid, but we did, there's a lot of things that'll suddenly come and be knocking on the door.
Yeah.
If you watch the news the last couple of days, no one was watching anything else. So if Republicans were hoping that they'd be able to use 10 busloads of migrants arriving in Chicago a day to make Democrats look bad, or even Congressman Henry Cuellar's carjacking in Washington, D.C., no one was probably aware of those things taking place because of this drama.
It's not a good look. And it just looks like more chaos. And it does raise serious questions about their ability to get anything done. And and this was bumped up right against a shutdown threat that was Republicans threatening to shut down the government. I mean, even Senate Republicans were all but begging the conservatives in the House to stand down and let McCarthy do what he ultimately did, but maybe not at the 11th hour. So they're on an island, but as long as the motion to vacate threshold is one member can force that vote, they're going to have outsized influence, and folks can snicker and poke fun at those 8 or those 8 to 20, depending on the day, 8 to 15, but they have a lot of say. Now there is bipartisan interest in the House at changing some of the rules that McCarthy negotiated to become Speaker, including the motion to vacate being one member. They want to raise that so this doesn't happen over and over and over. So we'll see when they might even get to that on the floor. The Republicans want to finish these spending bills. They'll have to do something in November to keep the government open. And just the way this all works, and the Senate hasn't passed a single one of its spending bills, they're going to need another CR. I think we can say that. We've watched this long enough. They're going to need one right before Thanksgiving. Kick this into December, maybe get a big spending package. But, oh, by the way, the problem with what's called an omnibus is the Gates 8 to 15 said no more omnibuses, not now, not ever. So unless you raise the motion to vacate threshold of Speaker Jordan or Speaker Scalise or the power sharing mega powers puts an omnibus on the floor that's been blessed by Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Joe Biden, well, it's motion to vacate time part 2.
Yep. And we made it this far without mentioning the word hideaways. I guess we'll save that for another day, but just suffice to say, people can look it up, but former Speaker Pelosi and former Majority Leader Hoyer are going to have to walk further to get to votes for the rest of the session. But that's enough for this week's Political Theater podcast, even though political theater never really ends. Just so you know, this Sunday, the 3 House Democrats who are running for the Senate in California are going to meet in a debate that Roll Call is co-sponsoring. And we have one of our reporters on the panel asking the questions. We'll have a live stream feed of that in English and Spanish on rollcall.com, plus coverage of the event and a transcript on our site once it's over. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the political newsletter that we put out every Thursday at the races. You can get it on rollcall.com. And until next time, when I hope that Jason Dick is back in this chair, I'm Herb Jackson. Thank you, John.
Thank you.